Welcome to Food Safety Training at Giovanni Foods. In this training, we are going to cover how we make safe food and how you can help. The first question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we make safe food? The first steps we have to take is follow all laws, rules, and regulations for food manufacturing. The government and other agencies have figured out how everyone has to make safe food, and we have to follow those rules. The government hasn't anticipated every single type of food manufacturing facility and all types of food, so we have to look at ourselves and identify what kind of hazards are specific to our food that we need to look out for. Finally, we need to prevent those hazards that we've identified from affecting our food. There are all kinds of laws, rules, and regulations that we have to follow. Most of them are written by the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. The biggest ones are what we call Good Manufacturing Practices, or GMPs. They're a set of rules that every single food manufacturer needs to follow in order to make safe food. There are unique laws for each state and country that our products are sold in, and we also have a third-party audit called Safe Quality Foods that we use to show our customers that the food that we make for them is safe, and here's the proof. Let's talk about the good manufacturing practices that apply to you. Those are generally the ones that fall under the people category. Other categories of good manufacturing practices are the products, processes, procedures, and the premises. The premises includes things like designing the sewage system to be in the floor rather than overhead and have sewage dripping on product. Those kinds of things. Common sense. Let's talk about the good manufacturing practices that you can control, not our sewage. First thing that you can do, that's the most important thing, is to wash your hands. It's very important. Other things include wearing hairnet and beard nets if you have a beard, wearing clean clothing, staying home when you are sick, and wearing blue bandages provided by the facility that are easy to find in case they fall off. It is so important that you wash your hands. You have to wash your hands every time you enter the plant floor, after you leave a bathroom, locker room, or you come back from break, when your hands are visibly soiled, or after touching the floor or anything that was touching the floor. The floor is very dirty. We consider anything that touches your feet to be the floor. So ladders, staircases, anything like that is the floor. Anything that touches the floor is contaminated with germs and maybe even pathogens. You have to wash your hands every time you touch the floor or something that was on the floor. Store everything elevated off of the floor. Things like hoses, sample cups, thermometers, pipes, pipe fittings, anything that touches you, the food, or employees cannot be stored on the floor. If you pick anything up from the floor, you have to make sure you clean that and your hands. You'll learn about PPE from our safety manager. So that's personal protective equipment, things that protect you. What we're going to talk about here is product protective equipment, things that protect our product from getting your hair in it or anything like that. So you have to wear a hairnet in our warehouse or our production facility. You must secure your hearing protection to your hard hat or something like that to prevent it from falling into the product. If you have a beard, you have to wear a beard net and it has to fully cover your mustache. And you do have to wear closed-toed shoes. Other good manufacturing practices that you are expected to follow is wearing clean clothing, ideally company-issued uniforms. And we also ask that you keep any personal items in your locker, but don't keep food or drink in your locker. It attracts bugs and pests that get in your stuff and then your neighbor's stuff, and they're very hard to eradicate. So no food, no drinks in the locker room. We do not allow anyone to wear nail polish or fake nails on the production floor. If you have them, they do need to be covered with gloves. This is because nail art and nail polish can chip off and fall into product. Other things that we're not allowed to wear on the plant floor is any kind of jewelry. No earrings, no bracelets, anything like that. The only exception is you are allowed to wear plain wedding bands with no stones or anything that can fall off, and also medical alert bracelets or necklaces. Smoking, cigarettes, cigars, or vapes is only permitted in designated smoking areas outside, and cigarette butts must be placed in the proper receptacles so they don't start a fire. Other things we're not allowed to do on the plant floor is any eating or drinking except for water from clear plastic water bottles or disposable cups on the floor. Good manufacturing practices are more than rules that you have to follow. They also apply to our products. In this case, we have to make sure that everything is labeled properly and traceable. Here's an example of an ingredient label. It says what it is and what lot number it is. That way we can tell what it is. Speaking of traceability, we have to put a lot code on all of our products. The most common lot code we use is seen here. The first 3 digits are the day of the year, and the last 2 digits are the year. In this case, it is 003, so the 3rd day of the calendar year, meaning it's January 3rd, 2026. Other customers might require that we use different lot numbers, but this is the basic one that we use. Okay, we have covered some of the laws, rules, and regulations like good manufacturing practices that we have to follow in order to make safe food. Next, we're going to go into how we can identify hazards so that we can later work on preventing them. Next, let's identify some hazards that are specific to our products and our process. This is the first step of HARP-C, or Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventive Controls. First, we have to understand what kind of products we sell. We generally sell 2 categories of product: hot fill, so this is our pasta sauce, our salsa, and our drinks. And we also cold fill on line 5, plain apple cider vinegar. These are 2 different processes, but for the purpose of this training, we're going to cover hot fill because it has a lot more controls to make sure that the products that we make are shelf stable and do not require refrigeration. Now that we know what types of products we're making, we need to know how we're making them. Here is a simplified version of our process so that we can go over it. Our process starts by receiving in all of the ingredients and raw materials needed to make it. We store those, eventually stage them according to our batch sheets, and make a batch. We test the batch before we send it over to the kettles, or it gets heated and then filled. We then cap the jar as soon as possible and hold it hot to make sure that the residual heat from the sauce will sterilize the jar and the cap. After that, we cool the product, put a label on it, package it into trays or cases, make sure that it passes all quality and food safety checks, and then ship it. We just covered what kinds of products we make and how we're making them. But what kind of hazards are we supposed to look out for? Hazards are broken down into 4 different categories. There are biological hazards, so these are things like pathogenic bacteria, viruses, and mold that can spoil the product and make people very sick and potentially even kill them. There are also chemical hazards that we have to account for. They can be just as deadly. Things like allergens could accidentally make their way into the product if you don't wash your hands after you ate a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or if a supplier gives us something that is contaminated with allergens. Also, chemicals like sanitation chemicals, if they carry over into the product, can hurt somebody. Another category is physical hazards. This is a big one for us. Anything that is hard or sharp that when consumed or when eaten can cut somebody in their mouth or in their throat or cause choking. The last category is radiological hazards and food fraud hazards, which we'll cover later. Let's dig a little deeper into the specifics of each hazard. So the biological category, like we talked about before, is any kind of bacteria, virus, or mold, or anything too small to see that can cause illness or be pathogenic. These are sometimes spoilage related, and these are sometimes invisible, so the consumer will not know that the product is bad and could make them sick just by looking at it. So it's really important that we control for biological hazards. Next, let's get into the specifics of chemical hazards. These generally fall into two different categories. Chemicals, things like sanitation chemicals, pesticides, and other things that are not supposed to be in the product, and allergens. This is our sanitation chemical room. These chemicals are used to clean and sanitize our equipment, but are definitely not supposed to be in your food. Our cleaning and sanitation chemicals should be kept locked so that only trained and authorized people can access those chemicals to clean our food contact equipment. We also use a color coding system. Yellow, in this case, indicates that the tote or utensil is for sanitation purposes. Allergens are a chemical hazard we have to look out for. Allergens cause a dangerous immune system reaction in certain people who are allergic to whatever they ate, and these symptoms can range from hives, itching, swelling, up to trouble breathing and even death. So it's very important that every allergen is labeled appropriately so people with allergies can be aware and stop themselves from eating it. Not everything is officially considered an allergen in the United States. So the US government has gone through a bunch of data and science and determined what people living here are most likely allergic to. These things have to be labeled and declared so that people can avoid eating it. The US allergens are wheat and gluten, tree nuts, peanuts, eggs, shellfish, milk, fish, soy, and sesame. Some of our products get sold in other countries, so we have to declare the allergens appropriate for that country. We've evaluated where all of our products are sold and determined that we also have to consider mustard an allergen because many of our products are sold in Canada, and the Canadian government has analyzed the population of Canada and found that a lot of people there are allergic to mustard. So in addition to the US allergens, we consider mustard as an allergen in our facility. We have eliminated a lot of allergens that we used to carry, and right now the only allergens that are on site are milk. So this includes cheese, heavy cream, all the dairy products we put in our pasta sauces, and also mustard, which primarily goes in barbecue sauce. Going back to the type of food safety hazards that we have to prevent is physical hazards. Like we talked about before, this is anything hard or sharp that can cut a person or choke someone. Physical hazards are the most common food safety incident here. As a reminder, physical hazards are anything hard or sharp that can get into the food. Examples of this include glass from glass breaks, wood from pallets or bins, caps or metal shavings from equipment, plastic, or anything else you can think of that can fall into our batch tanks, our kettles, or the ingredients as we're handling them. One of our biggest risks of physical hazards is broken glass. You can really help us out if anytime you see glass, you clean it up. We just covered the hazards that are common to our facility and our products. Now we're going to talk about how we can take those hazards and reduce or eliminate them. Now that we know what kind of hazards we're looking out for, we can go through our process to see where we're introducing more hazards and where we can prevent those hazards. Let's take a deep dive into the first column here, where we're receiving ingredients, storing them, staging them, adding them to a batch, and then testing the product before we heat it up. One of the very first things that we do to prevent hazards from reaching our customers is implementing a supplier approval program. This is where we review all of our manufacturers' hazards so that we can make sure they didn't send us anything that we can't control or handle. So what are we looking for? Here's some diced tomato. It doesn't look like that when we receive it, but you get the point. We need to make sure that what the suppliers are giving us doesn't have any physical hazards, so there's no metal in there, there's no wood, there's no stones, there's nothing that can cut or choke somebody. There's also not any pathogens in it, so there's not going to be anything that we need to worry about on a micro level. We also need to make sure that the diced tomatoes that the supplier is sending do not contain any allergens that are not declared. There's no hidden peanuts in the tomatoes. The last thing that we look at is whether or not there are any chemicals left over from sanitation or pesticides that should not be in the product. But like we talked about earlier, we do have ingredients with allergens in them. So what do? We label, we segregate that ingredient that has allergens in it away from something else so that it do not cross-contaminate. And we make sure every time we touch that, handle it, or use it, that we clean after and make sure we got all of the allergen out of there. We use a color coding system to prevent us from cross-contamination. In this case, we're using red for allergens. So if you see any scoops or utensils that are red, do not use them unless you are using an allergen. And of course, we have to run products that contain allergens. In these cases, we have to sanitize really well afterwards and then ensure that we got all of the allergen out by doing allergen-specific swabs. If the swab shows up that there's still allergen, we have to clean again until we can be sure all of the allergen is out of there. We also have allergen-specific handling procedures. If you're handling or running something with an allergen, we block off the area to prevent things from moving in and out, wear smocks or lab coats to protect your clothes from being contaminated and going somewhere where there is not allergens. And of course, anytime you handle an allergen or you're coming back from break, you don't know what you ate or other people ate and you touched, you need to follow the good manufacturing practices of washing your hands. So you don't track allergens or germs onto the plant floor and into the product. All right, so we've talked about storage and handling, and now let's talk about batching. So this is a snippet of a batch sheet. It contains a list of ingredients that we added to the batch along with their lot numbers so we can look back to see what we added and the quantities. It is super important that this is accurate and reflects exactly what we added. If it's not, then if there's a problem with allergens or any other kind of hazard, we're not preventing the hazard from reaching the consumer. Now that we've made a batch, we need to test it to make sure that the pH is low enough so that the product is safe once we bottle it. If the pH is not low enough, we have to adjust it down by adding some citric acid, some vinegar, or other kinds of acids to make it safe. Why do we do this? It's so that germs cannot grow in the bottle once it is packaged and not refrigerated. All of our products are acidic so that they can be shelf stable. The pH ranges between about 3 and 4, and that's the sweet spot for not being too sour, but also being safe. All right, we just covered the first column in our process flow diagram. We covered how we receive, store, handle, and stage our ingredients, how we put those ingredients together to make a batch, and how we test it at first to make sure the pH is low enough and adjust if necessary. Now let's cover the next column that is really vital for food safety. We'll talk about how we heat the product up to kill any germs, how we fill the product hot, cap it, hold it hot so that the jar and the cap can be sterilized, and how we cool it down for product quality before doing everything in the back end. Let's talk about the very first step, so heating that product to kill all the germs. We call this pasteurization. So this is cooking the pasta sauce, the salsa, and the barbecue sauce for a set amount of time at high enough temperature to kill those germs. Why do we do it? If we didn't, germs that cause illness and spoilage could live and hurt people when they eat our sauce. The cook time and temperature is super important to get right. This is determined by our process authority, a bunch of scientists at Cornell who know our products and our process and have set the minimum temperature that we need to cook at to kill the germs. Okay, now we have our product. It is safe and it is pasteurized. Now we have to get something to put it in. We package in glass and plastic, and we receive that glass and plastic fully assembled from the manufacturers. However, they don't promise that there is no foreign material within the glass. They try their best, but sometimes mistakes happen. So before we put sauce in a jar, we invert that jar with a machine, and the glass will fall out. This is what our container inversion machine looks like. Glass enters from the top, gets gripped in between two rubber pieces, and turned upside down so that gravity and a puff of air shot into the glass can knock any physical hazards out of the glass before the glass is righted for filling. Container inversion, like we just covered, is one of our preventive controls, and it is very important to remove any physical hazards from the container. We just removed physical hazards from the jar or bottle we're going to put our product in, but there is tons of opportunity in our filling and capping areas to add it back. If there is a glass break in an open product area, it is super important to call quality for assistance. They will investigate what happened during the glass break and help identify what jars could be contaminated with glass so that they can be thrown out. If there is any glass breakage in an open product area where the jar is open or there's sauce, it is so important to call quality prior to starting the line again. If glass breaks or is found in a closed product area, it is safe for you to clean up properly, and you do not need to call quality over for help. Glass breaks in the labeler, the palletizer, or the tray packer can be cleaned up by anyone. You don't need quality's permission to start the line back up again. So wherever you see glass, please safely clean it up with a broom or wearing gloves. If a glass break does happen in an area with open product or ingredients, you do need to stop whatever you're doing, stop the line, notify quality, help quality clean up glass and the surrounding area safely wearing gloves, follow quality's instruction, and get their approval to restart the line. This is so we can prevent glass or other physical hazards from contaminating the product and hurting people that we sell our sauce to. All right, now that we've covered how important glass and preventing it from contaminating our product is, let's talk about the filling process. One way we can prevent germs from growing in our product is to fill the product hot. We have to fill the product hot enough to kill the germs that are in the jar or the cap, because when we get them, they're not sterile. This also helps the jar draw a vacuum so that the jar will seal properly and prevent any air from getting inside. This is a close-up of one of our fillers. Hot sauce is entering a clean jar. If glass were to break right here, it's very easy for the glass to ricochet off and land in an open product jar. So it is very important to throw away all of the jars in the filling and capping area just in case there is any cross-contamination from a glass break. Filling and fill volume is very important. Here we have a visual diagram of an underfilled jar. So there's hot product in the bottom and a lot of headspace. In this case, it's too much headspace. That jar and that cap don't get enough heat to kill any germs that rode in on them. We also have problems when we fill the jars too much. So in this visual representation, there is barely any headspace at all, and in fact there's some sauce in between the cap and the jar that prevents the jar from sealing. So this is not going to be food safe. Now our jars are properly filled, we need to apply a cap. Our cappers apply the cap with a little bit of steam to help sterilize that headspace we just talked about. The steam also helps soften the plastic in the cap that creates a strong seal so that the product is shelf stable. The next step in our process is to hold the product hot. It gives that residual heat time to kill any germs on the cap or at the neck of the jar. The scientists over at Cornell have run the math and determined that we need to hold our product hot for at least 5 minutes to make sure those germs are killed in the jar. After those 5 minutes, then they can enter the cooler and start cooling off. Please do not push the jars along in the hot hold table. It's a very important 5 minutes for them. Just leave them where they are and the equipment will take care of it. After our cooler, we have a piece of equipment called a dud detector. What that does is ensure that every single jar that we made is sealed properly and will not spoil. That works by checking each and every one of our caps to make sure that the safety button isn't indented. If you find any jars with a popped top, that is a bad jar. It is not food safe. Our dud detectors are an important piece of equipment. They check every single one of our jars and kick off any jars with a popped top. This is important because it prevents any unsealed product from getting to a customer and making them sick. All right, we just covered the second column of our process flow diagram. We covered how we heat the product, fill it hot, cap it, and hold it hot to kill any germs. We also covered how important glass breaks are to monitor, especially in the filler and capper areas. If there's any glass that breaks there, it's so easy to contaminate the equipment or other products around it with glass. So it is super important that you call quality, stop the line, clean it up, and investigate how it happened so that we can make sure we didn't send anyone any glass. Let's finish up reviewing our process flow diagram. Once the product is sealed and cooled, we label the product, package it, test it, and a bunch of other things to make sure that the product is safe before shipping it to our customers. Let's talk about labeling first. We have to make sure that we're applying the correct label. That is especially important when the product contains an allergen. If we make a product and the label does not declare that there is an allergen, people can get really sick. In this case, this label says contains milk and warns anyone who's allergic to milk not to eat this product. We have to make sure we're applying the right labels. So one of our preventive controls is to label allergens properly. This is really important so that we can warn anyone who has an allergy not to eat the product. All right, now the product is packaged, it's off our palletizer. It seems like it's ready to go. But wait, we need to check everything to make sure we did our jobs right. We need to check every single one of the preventive controls we've talked about in this presentation. We need to check that the product was pasteurized, that the pH is low, that containers were inverted, that the fill temperature was high enough to kill germs and held hot enough to kill those germs, that any popped tops were detected and rejected from our dud detectors, and any glass breaks were documented and cleaned up properly. All of these things and more are things that quality checks to make sure that the product we're sending out the door is safe for anyone to consume. This process generally takes a day or two, so it's very important that we double check that what we did is right. So how do we check that everything we did is right? Well, we're not everywhere all the time. We rely on you guys to properly document what happened so that we can evaluate whether the product is safe. It's super important that we follow what we call good documentation practices, or GDPs. The golden rule of good documentation practices is if it isn't documented, it doesn't happen. So you write down any relevant details, you write the full and honest truth, and anything you need to correct, use a single line crossout so we can still see what is underneath. Please just be honest and truthful with whatever you write down. It's really important. Here's an example of a very clear record. We can tell exactly what lot number was used and how much was used. And there's even a proper crossout so we can see the number before it was changed. Finally, we're done with our process flow diagram. We've labeled the product, put it in a tray or a case, made sure it passed all of the tests and is safe for consumers, and shipped it out of here. So we've completed all of our tasks. We've followed all laws, rules, and regulations. We've identified the hazards, and we've prevented those hazards from occurring. There's a couple other things to look out for. So there's this thing called food defense. This is a practice put into place after a bunch of terrorist attacks, after we realized that the food chain is a very attractive target for terrorists or anyone who wants to do the public harm. This is things like people sneaking into the building to add chemicals or anything harmful to our products, or even disgruntled employees. So if you see something odd, please tell someone in management. This includes things like strange people adding ingredients to a batch who you've never seen before, or strangers trying to gain entry to the building. Don't let them in and let management know. To prevent any incidents, we lock all access points, use surveillance cameras, and have well-lit areas so that we can monitor what's going on. We have company badges to identify employees and use different colored hard hats for visitors, orange, so that you can clearly identify a new person. We use a third-party audit to check that we are making food safe. We use a program called Safe Quality Foods, or SQF. Once per year, an auditor will come on site and double check all of our food safety practices to make sure we're making safe food. They develop a long report that we can send our customers to demonstrate that we are making safe food. Before these kinds of audits, customers, so like Target and Walmart and General Mills, were doing yearly audits on every single one of their manufacturers, which took a ton of time from everybody. So there's standards developed by Safe Quality Foods to make sure that we're doing it safe and our customers can be assured.